We received an urgent message yesterday that the Zapatistas in Mexico are under attack, and they're asking for help from people around the world. And we're going to talk to Dan Fischer, who had been in the area that the Zapatistas are involved with just this year. So we'll get into that right now. Dan, good evening.
Good evening, Stan.
So when did you go down there, and how long, and where is this exactly?
I went down to Chiapas in late December. I was there primarily for two events. The first was New Year's Day of this year, 2014, which was the 20th anniversary of January 1st, 1994, when the Zapatistas first rose up. The other thing that I went down to Chiapas for was the Little School, which was an opportunity for supporters around the world to come study for a few days with the Zapatistas, learn about their struggle and about the everyday lives of the communities. Chiapas is the southernmost state of Mexico, right by the Guatemalan border.
So let's pretend that we don't know anything about the Zapatistas, and for me, that's not too far from the truth. So why did they rise up? What's the situation in Mexico?
Well, the Zapatistas are a large group of indigenous small farmers, and they rose up on January 1st, 94, because that was the day that Nafta, or the North American Free Trade Agreement, took effect. Of course, they called themselves the product of 500 years of indigenous resistance, but Nafta was what they responded to most immediately. And two of the things Nafta did, one was it flooded the Mexican economy with highly subsidized U.S. corn. So, of course, although NAFTA has free trade in the name, it's the opposite of free trade. It's an unfair competition. And the second thing was it revoked the right in the Mexican Constitution, Article 27. It revoked that right to land for communally owned farms called ejidos. Article 27 was a hard-won victory of the 1910 Mexican Revolution. Emiliano Zapata was a peasant leader in south of Mexico. Zapatistas take their name from him. And so here in the lead up to NAFTA, Mexico actually revoked that article of the Constitution, and NAFTA solidified it. So it was a highly undemocratic trade pact. And this is something that was easily foreseeable. Subcomandante Marcos, who's a very prominent Zapatista spokesperson, called NAFTA a death sentence for the Indians. The New York Times at the time in the early 90s supported NAFTA because they said it would lock in these right-wing economic reforms without regard to whether the small farmers supported them or not, and of course they didn't. The San Francisco Federal Reserve Bank at the time said that these business-friendly policies such as NAFTA will lead to increased consolidation of farming into larger, more efficient units, and to significant movement of the Mexican workforce out of agriculture and into other sectors. So, of course, today, 20 years later, we've seen 2 million small farmers of Mexico displaced from their land because of these horrendous corporate-friendly trade policies.
So it became uneconomical for a farmer to raise corn and eat it on his own land because they were flooded by cheap American corn.
That's right, and again, it's cheap because it's highly subsidized by the U.S. And so the Zapatistas rose up. They said, we're not going to be victims of corporate progress, like a lot of these economists are saying we have to be. They said in their declaration of war against the Mexican government, enough is enough, ya basta. And so on January 1st, 94, they occupied thousands of Zapatistas wearing their ski masks to conceal their identities, occupied 7 cities in Chiapas, including San Cristobal de las Casas. And in these 7 cities, they occupied the city halls. They freed the prisoners from the jails. And they made international headlines drawing support for their cause. After 12 days of fighting, on January 12th, actually, the Mexican government signed a ceasefire with the Zapatistas. And the reason they issued the ceasefire was they responded to very heavy pressure from Mexican civil society. Just hours before the ceasefire was announced, the ceasefire was announced just hours before the planned protest, which wound up happening anyways. 100,000 people marched down to the Central Plaza of Mexico City. And since January 12th, 1994, the Zapatistas have continued the rebellion, but almost entirely it's become a nonviolent uprising, with a few exceptions here and there in self-defense. And they focused on achieving liberty and land and democracy by really building in another world. A society that's horizontally run in terms of their governance, in terms of their economy. It's been an inspiration for social movements around the whole globe.
So tell us the things that you saw.
Well, a few days after New Year's, I joined the little school, and that's where I followed around my host family and a teacher that I was assigned with. It was just me and my host family. I wasn't matched with other students. And they called it a school, but really it wasn't much of a school as, we'd think classrooms and so forth. Instead, I followed around my family and saw what they do on an average day. And so I followed my family to work, and we'd pick coffee beans, and we'd harvest corn, and we'd herd some cattle. And I saw, for one thing, that the economy is run to a remarkable degree without bosses. So my host family worked as a family unit. Other people work as worker collectives. But again, they're working for themselves. They produce enough goods, the Zapatistas do enough food, that they're able to feed themselves. They import a few small things like salt, but they produce enough produce not just to feed themselves, but also to sell things like corn and coffee into the market. Another thing that struck me, Stan, was the direct democratic governance. So there's 3 levels of governance. There's the community level, the autonomous municipality level, and the regional level. The Zapatistas have about 35 autonomous municipalities and 5 autonomous regions. I was in the region of La Realidad. And at the community level, decisions are made by a popular assembly, not unlike Occupy Wall Street. In fact, you can trace a lot of Occupy Wall Street's decision-making techniques back to the Zapatistas. But they elect delegates up to the higher 2 levels. And I met with the highest level. And the highest level is called the Good Government Boards. And it's important to note that even at this level, there are no paid politicians. People work only part-time, and there's a 3-year term limit. When I say they work part-time, every 15 days of the month, they have to leave and another crew takes over. And I met with them, and I only had to wait a few minutes, and I gave them the Beehive Design Collective's latest poster. This is a political art group up in Maine, and they have a poster about resistance in Latin America. And I thought they'd be interested in it because some of the ants, all the characters in this political mural are animals. Some of the ants are carrying Zapatista slogans. One of them says, "Everything for everyone and nothing for ourselves," which is their slogan of solidarity with other social movements around the world. Another one of their slogans that the ants were carrying is, "We lead by following." And that referred to the government's ideology of not trying to lead the people, but follow the people's directives. And so I give this to the Good Government Board, and they hang it up in their wall. As far as I know, it's hanging up right now in their office. But my point is that I was able to meet with them that quickly, and so were my host family.
So this wasn't just something special for you. It's kind of routine?
Yep, they'd say, I have to consult with the host family, and they'd come back maybe a couple hours later, or even less. Could you imagine in Connecticut trying to meet with the governor or something in less than an hour? But here in La Realidad, it was possible.
Well, how about the schools down there? Not your schooling there, but what's school like for the kids and young people?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. And I went and saw the schools. And first of all, I was astounded by the beautiful murals and paintings on the outside. But on the inside, the schools are just as interesting. The kids have a say in the curriculum. They come up with what they learn along with the elders of the community. In addition, there are no grades, so it's all about having the kids learn something and remember it rather than trying to get a number at the end of the course.
No high-stakes testing?
That's right, and they've also completely revamped the curriculum. So history, for example, they've turned to focus more on indigenous history and social movement history.
And they don't spend 1 million hours on the presidents of Mexico, I assume?
I would think not.
How about health care? What do they have in terms of that?
Before I answer healthcare, I should also note that the Zapatistas have not taken a single cent from the Mexican government since 1996. So they're actually building these schools, these hospitals and health clinics on their own. And the healthcare system is very good. It's been praised by the World Health Organization. And it's a mix of traditional Mayan medicines and modern medicines. And actually, some of the indigenous communities from outside of the Zapatista territories come to the Zapatista hospitals because they're better. The Zapatista hospital of La Realidad, for example, has a functioning ultrasound machine and other advanced technology like that. Doctors who will treat indigenous people without the sort of racism you see in the surrounding hospitals. So it's an autonomous healthcare system that's been praised by a number of people.
And before we get into other aspects, I guess we should talk a little bit more about that emergency call that's coming around. I mean, a teacher was killed. There's some people in Mexico who hate this experiment, and they've put out a call for solidarity rallies. Is that right?
Yep, and this is very important. I would have been amazed and inspired by the Zapatistas even if they were building a new world in peaceful conditions. But the fact is they're building a new world in the face of an ongoing paramilitary and state terrorism campaign directed against them. In fact, not too long after their '94 uprising, Chase Manhattan Bank sent a memo to the Mexican government saying we have to eliminate the Zapatistas. That's a quote. And the Zapatistas have withstood it. So this latest attack was another incident in the history of repression. And basically, armed paramilitary groups attacked unarmed Zapatistas, wounding 15 people, destroying an autonomous school and clinic, and murdering one teacher at the little school, the same little school I attended. In fact, it happened in the same region of La Realidad. His name was Galeano. So people from around the world, academics, intellectuals, artists, have put out a call for solidarity with the Zapatistas. On May 18th, there's going to be rallies in solidarity, and on May 24th is a day of remembrance, calling for justice for Galeano. And you can find this letter at www.anattackonusall.org. The letter has been signed by Noam Chomsky, Angela Davis, Mumia Abu-Jamal, Stan Heller, and many others.
All right, now let's go back into some other things that you saw, maybe about health and culture, some things that you could tell us. Sure.
I'll tell you a little bit about the culture. And one thing that I noticed was that my host family and other Zapatistas that I met were not drinking alcohol, were not using drugs, and that was a very conscious decision the Zapatista government made to ban those substances in their among the Zapatistas. And it's not a law imposed on them from above; it's a law that they took on for themselves. Another thing, I should also note that this government has banned pesticides. All the agriculture is done without pesticides, and what else?
Well, I mean, it's kind of interesting about the drugs and the alcohol. Our dog here is maybe objecting to some of that, but sort of the progressive left here is for legalization, but you say there they've decided to actually outlaw it.
That's right, but it's important to remember this isn't the Mexican government banning these substances, it's the communities themselves. It's a bottom-up process. I noticed that every teenager I spoke with, from everything that I could see, got along with their parents. So here you have a community where people are radically in control of their own culture. They have their autonomous radio stations and so forth. And so as a result, it has it's the safest place in all of Mexico, according to Gustavo Esteva, who's a former Zapatista advisor and an intellectual who came up to Connecticut from Mexico last fall. Very low crime rate amongst the Zapatistas, and one of the reasons is there's very little inequality. The land is communally owned. There is you have a situation where people are working for themselves, where the kids have a say in their curriculum, and so people have a great degree of control over their own lives.
Maybe close some aspects of culture. Do they have megaplexes and things like that?
Well, my home family actually did have electricity. It was solar powered. They had a little movie theater. There was a small little TV in the front, and then lots and lots of benches. A bunch of Zapatista themed DVDs we could choose from. Another interesting thing on culture,
Could they see the normal type DVDs? Is that excluded?
They could. They had satellite too when we're watching TV. The kids were only allowed to watch the TV at night, so all day they were playing outside. Another, a very vital aspect of culture is the role of women. One of the 4 textbooks that they gave us as students was about the role of women, and it's advanced dramatically since '94. The revolutionary law of women allows women to work outside of the home, have any job they choose. Women are involved in all the levels of Zapatista government and in the Zapatista National Liberation Army, and there's still a ways to go, definitely, but it's something that they're really focusing on improving.
What about sort of cutting edge issues like gay rights? Did you get into that at all?
That's something that the Zapatista communiques talk about a lot. When I talked with my host family, they certainly said that they supported gay rights, for example, but it's not an issue that would come up often, honestly.
Or abortion?
That's a tricky issue, and you can read more about abortion in a book called Developing Zapatista Autonomy, and it's a contentious issue, but the revolutionary law of women does guarantee it as a right. It's just a matter of whether or not it's always enforced.
Well, let's close. How many people are we talking about? How big are these communities?
Well, according to the political scientist Neil Harvey, there's about 150,000 people. According to the journalist Raul Zabecki, there's 200,000. And according to Subcomandante Marcos, who's a Zapatista spokesperson, there's 300,000 people between the Zapatistas and the people living in the Zapatista territories who accept the legitimacy of the autonomous government. So this is a very large-scale society that gave me a lot of hope that another world is in fact possible.
And on May 18th, hopefully people around the world will defend them.
Yes, let's hope so.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dan.